Hey everybody, welcome back to the Unreal Engine live training stream. I'm your host Alexander Pascal, and joining me today is Tim Hobson, our support tech. And he has quite a lot to talk about with lighting. He also, I'd like to say at this time, has some really great troubleshooting guides out there on the wiki. If you look up lighting troubleshooting, just going to throw that one out there so that if you don't cover something here, there's a lot covered there.
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of stuff on there. So most of that's and like 99% of that stuff just comes from the audience, or not audience, but the users in the community asking questions and everything. And these are ones that I answered all the time. So it really helped to just kind of have it public facing, so that way anyone could look there without having to sift through Answer Hub or anything like that. So.
And you've got a lot of questions off of the forum post from this, and a lot of questions that we're going to be taking out of chat. But you've got a little presentation put together based off of questions from you all out there. And if you're watching us live and you're on Twitch, you can throw questions into chat, and I will be taking them and putting them into a doc so that Tim can answer them after he does his presentation. So Tim, take it away.
So before I start, one thing I really just want to go over is at the end of this stream, you're not going to walk away like this great lighting artist. That's not the goal of this. I just really want to show a bunch of tips and techniques that I've learned over the course of working here at Epic that have really helped me and helped me to troubleshoot some things and can help you, with your scenes and just optimizing. And so it's like, I really don't want this to be, it's like, I'm not a lighting artist. It's like, I don't want to give that perception. So, I guess we'll just jump right in, and the first thing I really wanted to go over, this one comes up a lot, is with light mass importance volumes, character detail volumes, and indirect lighting in general. So I wanted to show you some of the stuff that we can go over here. So what I have here is just a scene that I've already pre-built, and I'm not going to do a lot of building of lighting on this stream just because it can take a little while just depending on the number of assets you have, the light map resolutions and everything. So what we have here is I have my light mass importance volume, and you always want to use these in your levels when you're using static lighting, so that way you're focusing all the lighting to where it needs to be for these areas. And you can use more than one. It doesn't have to just be a single one. It's like I know a lot of people just say, it's like just add a light mass importance volume, but you can scale these and place them anywhere in your level. You're just telling light mass, this is where I want to focus my lighting and have the best indirect lighting. Anything, if you don't use one, it's actually using the bounding box of the world. So it's a larger world to calculate for, and you can probably have a little bit more issues. So just to show this real quick. Okay, so there's my light mass importance volume that I've just dragged in from the modes panel here. So if we just type in light mass, you'll see a couple of things that do pop up here. So we have our light mass importance volume. You can just drag that in and scale it to what you need it to be. So I've got mine covering this entire area here.
And then what is the exact purpose of the light mass importance volume? And when the level is really big, some areas are not covered by the volume, what happens?
Okay, so anything outside of there,
by the way.
I'd have to go back and look, because as much as I know about lighting, I don't remember every detail, and I tend to go back to documentation for a lot, and I'll just research every time. Well, not every time, but a lot. So anything outside of it, I think it only gets one indirect lighting bounce, and it's lower quality. So you want to kind of keep these things into playable areas. So if we look at games that have like a linear path, where you're kind of walking through the level, it's easier to have, your indirect lighting, your light mass importance volumes, covering these areas, and then anything outside of that is going to get a lower bake, quality bake, just because you don't want to focus, all these photons and everything being calculated there if you don't have to. So it's like I've got my light mass importance volume, and the whole point of this is we want to get the indirect lighting cache. So if we go here to show, visualize, and then our volume lighting samples here, what you're going to see is these samples that have been placed all throughout the level. And they are placed above shadow casting surfaces here. So what we get is we get a sample that's placed 50 units or 50 centimeters above a surface, and then you get another one that's 250 centimeters above a surface. And what this allows is for your characters that are in indirectly lit areas to actually blend better with this indirect lighting, indirectly lit area. Because otherwise you wouldn't have any shadow casting, and it can kind of look like your characters are floating. So it's like if you're looking here, it's like my movable character doesn't actually cast any shadows here. So we actually have and you can see, I know it may be hard on the stream, but you can see some of these samples that are placed around. So there's a couple of things you can do to light these characters in a different way. You don't have to always use the default settings. So if we look here, I got my character selected, and over here I'm going to type indirect, and you get this option here for indirect lighting cache. So what this allows is we have 3 different options here. We have indirect lighting volume, and then we have indirect point, which is the default, and then we have indirect lighting off. And this first one that I've got selected here is the indirect lighting point. This next one is the indirect lighting volume, and then this last one actually is not using any indirect lighting cache at all. So what you see is it's just rendered black. And I'm going to show you why this is important. So it's like, got some notes in front of me here because, like I said, I don't remember everything.
This is the importance of notes and doing it live.
Okay, so we have some commands.
Hit the tilde.
Yeah, let me. R dot.
So what's this one? R dot?
Yeah, R dot cache, and then draw interpolation points. And I'm going to hit 1 to enable that, not 2.
Yeah, 2 is like super true. It's like double true.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's how Booleans work.
Okay,
right?
So clear that out. And then we've got whoops. Sorry, 1 second.
R.cache.
Update every frame. Now this is actually in the documentation.
Update every frame.
Yes. Okay, so the 2 I'm using here, and I'll show you why this is important. We have r.cache, draw interpolation points, triggered to 1. So what that's doing is it's drawing these points now that I'm seeing here, and this shows how the character, in a movable character in an indirectly lit area, uses these cache points to actually blend the character in these areas. And the other one that I've enabled is r-cache.update every frame, which allows me to be able to see it. Otherwise, since we're rendering in real time here in the editor, you would only really see it like whenever it's you're actually moving the character. So I wanted to be able to see these at all times. So now to go back to the indirect lighting quality options here, what we get is we have point, which is on my first character here. Now, this gives you a single point here of interpolation, and what happens is as I move this character, it's blending between the next cache point. So we have 1 cache point back here, 1 here, and 1 up here, and it's going to blend over time between that point. And there's actually a command for that. There's a bunch of different r.cache commands. Let's see here. We have, I didn't actually write this one down. It's one of the ones, I can't actually read it right now, but it's there's one that actually interpolates over time.
Do you know what it's roughly called?
I think it's got interpolation in it. Trying to draw lighting samples, draw interpolation points. No, not that one. Yeah, transition speed. Sorry, there we go.
Transition speed. Okay.
Yes, transition speed. And if you look at if you do a question mark after this, and they look at the output log, it'll actually give you what the default setting is. It's actually a pretty good setting now, so that it slowly blends. And actually, I think if I play, whoops, I left my third person in there. But here, I think I actually set this up to simulate. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so
what's happening there?
Okay, so I'll cover that one in a second. That's actually going back to the r.cache interpolate over frames. So this actually deals with the volume one. So as we're doing the point one, what you can see here is as it's moving up and down, it's shifting between these. And what I'm actually doing here, and the reason I didn't move it forward to back is I moved it up is because I'm moving out of the range of that 300 units above where this last interpolation or last indirect lighting cache point was. So what you see is it's moving in and out of that and shifting. So if we come over here to our next one, and this guy is actually using volume, what he actually has is a set of volume around him here, and he's blending more slightly as he moves in and out of these spaces. So you can see there's a little bit more of a transitional way for him to move out and be lit. So as it just kind of blends a little bit more, and this one is doing it more over time. So if you move quickly out of a space where he's indirectly lit, you notice that there's a little bit of a hesitant, like a pause before it just kind of shifts completely. And then we have our last one here, which is not using the indirect lighting cache at all.
And so it comes out all black.
So there's no points at all for him to interpolate with. And he's coming out all black. So he has nothing to use. Okay, so now that we've kind of covered this little part for this, it's like you may be wondering, like, okay, you know, I've got my movable character in this indirectly lit area, but I have no shadows, and that kind of sucks. So let's look here, and what we got is like, I'm not gonna go in depth about this, but it's just to show you, it's capsule shadowing is a feature that was implemented back in 4.11, 4.12. And what it uses is a physics asset that is a representation of your character to have these soft shadows for our character in these areas. So what I've got here is I've already set this up, and then capsule, I don't know. Oh, I gotta have my character selected. Let's see here. All right, so if we have capsule shadows assigned to our skeletal mesh, we can actually enable those options here for direct shadowing, indirect shadowing. Indirect shadowing is the one that matters here because what we have is our character in indirectly lit areas. So disabling this, he's now walking on air, you know, and if we do have it enabled, we actually get that nice capsule shadows. And then it's like, can actually, and it uses these interpolation points here for our for the indirect lighting cache.
Yeah.
So
totally.
So it's a really cool kind of thing to actually have, you know, that in these areas. And just to show off capsule shadows here in direct lighting as well. It's the same character and everything. Since this one actually is being lit by a stationary light, we actually have dynamic shadows. And by enabling direct capsule shadows here, we actually, if I actually click on the button, you can actually see you get that soft shadow from our capsule versus the normal direct lighting.
So, quick question about the cubes on the screen. Moss Brothers asks, does the empty space around those cubes affect performance or build times, or does it just get ignored?
Okay. So, are we talking about the indirect lighting cache
yeah,
here?
all of your lighting cache dots.
Okay. So yes, these actually, and actually, let me pull up because I was going to show this in just a moment anyway. So you can actually adjust a lot of these settings can be adjusted in the world. Let me actually stop simulating here. So in world settings and light mass here, we have an option down here for volume lighting sample placement. And what you can do is, one is the default, and it gives you this spacing here. If you lower that to a lower value, somewhere between, I think it's like 0.1 and 1, it actually increases the density of these placed samples. So, you know, for something like where you have volume lighting here, and so you may see a shift or something that you don't like, you can actually get a better transition by lowering that. And let me drag my image over here. So in the base lightmass.ini, this is the only section really that I ever recommend changing. The density stuff is like, you don't really ever have to really worry about this. And we actually do have, so approximate clamp on the number of samples that are generated to about 30 megabytes for a landscape. And then we got the number of samples that can be placed, and then we try and cap this so that way it's not really something where you have to worry about it all the time. I'll come back to this in just one second. I want to show one other thing. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So we're looking at these indirect lighting samples that are placed. Let's look at the character volume. So I did quickly show is that you don't want to necessarily always increase the density of these placed samples all over the place, because you may not want it for your level. So that's where we have the character importance, character indirect lighting volume. And what this does is it actually places more dense samples in that area, so that if the character is moving up and down in these areas a lot, you can actually not move them outside that volume to where they're not interpolating. So you can always try and keep them blended nicely and make everything work well there. Now, let's see here. Now, if there is ever a case like where you need more samples, this is the only thing I ever recommend, possibly changing. And even then, it's like only do it for certain use cases. It's not an end-all, be-all kind of thing to go through and change. So we had discussed the first sample gets placed at 50 units above the first shadow casting surface, which is listed here. The next one is at 250, so that makes a total of 300. So what we're doing is we're spacing out these samples every 300 units. Now, if you ever need more surfaces, you can always increase here. 2 is the default, so that's why we only ever see the one at the 50 and then one at 250. And then if you change the 2 here to like 3, then you'll get a third layer as well. And you don't have to restart the engine for this. You can actually just edit this in the base light mask INI, save the file, rebuild lighting, and it pops right in. So
cool. Quick question,
yep.
As long as, just so we can knock this one out kind of early off.
Okay.
The calculations when building lighting, is all this going to be done on GPU or CPU?
CPU.
CPU.
There is no GPU light mask.
Correct. Now, I asked this, though, it was asked in chat, and everyone in chat immediately answered it, but I wanted to have it out here in the video.
I actually have that on my wiki lighting guide, and
yes,
even
it's in the wiki lighting guide, too.
I think I just copied and pasted like an awesome answer from Daniel Wright, so.
And,
I was like, I figured he's the master, so.
Yeah.
He answered it right, I just copy paste.
That's actually kind of what I do for a lot of the development questions. I kind of like Google, look up someone in particular I know might know the answer and see if they've ever answered it before. It's not a bad idea.
Yep. So,
and this, of course, also this requires baked light maps or no? Yes.
Hold on, what now?
To do this is based off of baked light maps?
It's actually using any static lighting, so pre-computed lighting altogether. So if you're using stationary static lights, yeah.
Cool.
Otherwise, you don't get these lighting samples at all.
Yep. Okay, cool. I hope that clarifies everything for y'all out there that we're asking.
All right. Okay, so I've got one more thing in this level I'm going to show real quick. And so with our indirect lighting cache, another thing just is why this is... I just made this like one little section just so that way it shows like the blending as you go into these darker areas. I've actually have a post-process in this that actually just disables auto exposure or eye adaptation. I tend to always disable that whenever I'm working in the editor, just because if it's enabled, everything in here would just brighten right up, and it wouldn't be easy to kind of see what I actually have for my scene and how I want it to look. So as we can see here, it's like everything moving as this is just kind of moving into a gradient of being lit more darkly as you're getting into these further back areas. I don't think there was... And then this is just the same thing as just a smaller light source coming in, and then everything blending further back. Okay, so moving right along. I know this one comes up a lot. Indirect lighting seams, or why do I have seams with my level? Let's see here. There we go. Need to save that. Okay, so let me get in my little house here. So this one comes up quite often, and everyone always asks, why does this happen? And quite simply, it's like so lighting is handled on the CPU, and every time an object in light mask, like whenever it's sent to a different thread. So this mesh here doesn't know the lighting information from this mesh. So what you get is you get these seams that can happen in indirectly lit areas. So it's like if we come back out here to the front, it's like I've actually got these 3 walls here, and you don't see a seam. This is because this is being directly lit. It's actually got a light source right on it. But what we're getting here is these light bounces that are coming back in, and it just doesn't blend very well. So there's a couple things that you can do to alleviate that, but it's not an end-all cure to everything. You can always adjust the light mask indirect quality to be a higher value, but whenever you do that, you actually need to also lower the lighting smoothness. And if you hover over this little tip here, there's actually, it tells you if you increase, this one to anything higher, it's also going to increase your light build times significantly, just depending on the value you use. And then the indirect lighting smoothness here, we would lower it to like a 0.65, 0.75 value, and it would try and smooth some of this out, but you tend to get more artifacts that way as well. It's just trying to find the right balance. I don't, this question comes up so often, and it's always like these very planar, like flat surfaces. You have a very plain basic material on it, so it's always easier to see these kind of artifacts. But I think whenever you have normal maps and whenever you have like a good diffuse texture that can kind of mask some things, I think that works really well too. It's not always like going to solve the issue, but it can help. Another thing here, and I always recommend, because this when this does come up, we don't recommend like over modularizing your levels as well. So it's like here it's like I've just used that same wall mesh and I've actually just stretched it out. That's not the best option, because what you get here is you don't get some of that, like it stretches the indirect lighting that has been baked as well, especially if it's a mesh that's been stretched very far. But what I do recommend is for people to, like if you have like a 4-room wall here, or 4-wall room here, is actually having these, wall. Yes.
Sorry.
4-walled room.
As they do. Sorry.
Way to call me out, sir. Way to call me out. At least I'm not mispronouncing words, I don't think, this time. I recommend actually just, building this as like a single mesh that has actually been light mapped properly and actually has been, is using like a proper layout for the light map, so that it actually does match this, the size of this wall. I think you just get better results that way. One other thing too is like I see this one come up a lot, is it's like I get light bleed here around the bottom of my floor mesh or my ceiling, and what's happening there is we actually have this large floor that now has to have shadows cast onto it, and it has to block all this light. But what you get is like this light is going to bleed over to some degree, depending on the light map resolution of things. Mm-hmm. You don't always want to crank the light maps all the way, jack them all the way up to 2048, 4096. That's just, you're just going to use a lot of texture memory when if you just designed a little bit differently. You can actually use a much lower texture resolution, or not texture, light map resolution, and solve the same issue. So what I've got is on my last one here, I've actually got that same floor mesh. I've just scaled it down, and yes, like you notice there's no bleed here as much. Let me actually select the surface. So it makes everything blend a lot better without having to worry about a lot of that bleed. It's a better way of, I guess, designing things. Now, and two, the benefit of not over modularizing a lot of your levels, well, not levels, but just like maybe that room with so many wall pieces, is that you now don't have a draw call for each one of those. You're not having to worry about a high texture resolution or light map texture resolution for each one. Let's see here. And while we're on this, I've got some more images. I've actually just pulled these straight from the documentation. We have a really good doc on just light mapping in general. I just wanted to...
And I can drop that into the description. And
yeah, it's just light mapping. If you search the docs.
Yep.
Okay, so what we got here is we've got a couple of boxes, and each one has their own face that have been modeled, and they have their own edges. So you can see these really hard seams and whatnot. And if we look at the light map that is for that, this looks like a flat mapping from like 3ds Max or Maya. And it's just laying all the faces out. And what you get is you don't get as much texel density here for low light maps. You have a lot of wasted space in between. And then when we get to our bake, what we get is we get a lot of errors here. So it's like a lot of these faces in between don't have like a good quality. They're not connected. So even if you had like a single wall with two faces that are split in the UV, you would still get that seam that you would see if they were separate meshes, because the information from one part of the UV doesn't know the other one, because those vertices are not connected. So what you start running into is like a lot of these, like just it looks not so good.
Mm-hmm. You want to fix those.
So let's see here. Okay, so this is the fixed mesh, and what we've got here is now we've got these faces that are not individual faces. They're actually a contiguous mesh. And then when we look at the light map now, what we actually get is like this one contiguous mesh, and we're actually using a lot of the space here that actually just fits very well together. So, and it's like it allows light maps to actually have a better bake and give you better quality. So it's like, if I don't click on it, you can actually see here, it's like a lot of those artifacts are now gone, and it's like, and a lot of it can actually just be remedied by increasing the light map resolution if needed. But again, keeping light map resolutions as low as possible is always like best practice. So, all right, close all those out. All right. Is there any other questions with light map scenes? I'm just kind of flying through this because we got a lot to go.
Yeah,
so.
Actually, okay, so I wanted you to be able to get done with what you're saying here.
Yeah,
but so with things like the seams that you were talking about earlier, will combining meshes within the editor also help alleviates seam issues? Creepy Pies is asking.
No, and the reason for that is it goes back to, okay, so if we look at this light map here, what I've got is like these are the two boxes, and then you got the top and bottom faces here. So if you combine the meshes in the editor and it repacks the light map, you're not going to get these, the repack of the light map is just going to take the UV that's already there and just essentially just repack it. It's not going to do any welding of these seams to make everything just kind of blend together. So it's like if this were just like two walls that were actually together, the end of this wall here, if it were connected here, would not know the lighting information there. So it's like the padding that's in between would actually cause that lighting seam just as well. So it's just a matter of, you know, designing your light maps, and it's light mapping is its own art form, I think. It's a matter of going through and, you know, seeing what works and what doesn't work, and then knowing the intricacies of how to fix those errors. But does that answer your question?
I think so. I think that mostly answers it.
Okay.
I mean, if it's not going to actually help out in the end, and this is actually what it's based off of, that's important to know.
I mean, a lot of things that people report with light maps or light mapping issues just come down to going back and how you design your assets. And don't look at the editor as always being a way to fix every issue out there. It's like modeling programs are always going to be a big help.
Yeah.
And manually doing some of this work. I mean, it can get you part of the way there in the editor, but you know, you may need to export the mesh outside the editor and do some fixing.
Yeah. Yep. So in the same strain, like you were saying about what you're going to have to kind of plan for in advance when you're setting up these lighting things. Like you said, it's going to take a little bit of thought beforehand. So Seto-kun is asking, or had asked, to ask about seams on light maps of modular buildings. There's a topic on the forum, but it just says to try everything until something works, apparently. But yeah. But what he'd really like to know is, advice on when you're planning for making modular buildings, perhaps something that's going to spawn in chunks or something like that.
Hold on, spawn it in chunks?
Well, I assume
because I mean, if it's being spawned in, that's not going to be using light mapping.
That's true.
That's going to be that will actually. It's like if you actually have any static lighting, that'll actually use the indirect lighting cache. Because it'll essentially treat it like a movable actor. Now, if you're doing everything through construction script in the editor and then building your lighting, I think it still just comes down to having good UVs for your light map. And you know, it's like our light mapping doc is like, I know there's a lot of techniques and everything, and it's a lot of tedious work and it's a lot of things to learn, but trying different things and trying, you know, to have a contiguous mesh and have a contiguous layout for your UV is better than this.
Yeah.
It's just you won't get as good a result this way, and each of these faces, as I was saying, it's like they don't know the lighting information for the other, like where they're connecting. So it's like you tend to get more lighting errors that way with your bake. Versus this one here.
All right.
So and there's actually a building option or a building example on the light mapping documentation as well. So I just grabbed the simple one to show you guys.
I think that helps answer to that one. Let's see, there's another kind of general question here about your scene and how you set these things up. It's Judd asks, should you always have a directional light and skylight in your world, or should both be movable, or just the directional light?
Depends on what you want. I mean, you have the option of using both in the capacity that you need. It's like, I mean, you could, like for instance, like if we're looking at distance filled ambient occlusion, you can use a movable skylight for that and have a static or a stationary directional light. So that's like, I think these things can be intertwined. It just depends on the end result that you're going to want and what you're trying to achieve. I think it's kind of a little bit of a broad question, so I don't know if I can answer it fully.
I guess that one does come down to, what are you making, and then you have to be like, oh. Right,
I tried to like on the forums, there were a few that were just kind of like that way, and it's like I tried to whittle them down to something that could be a little bit more useful.
All right, cool.
For everyone. Okay, so I'm gonna move right along here because still got stuff. All right, so let's see here. Someone asked about far shadows. I think it was William K. I didn't write the name down. But what we have is our directional light here. So in this one, I've just got a large landscape. This is kind of where far shadows kind of came in. It's like it was around 4.8, like with kite demo. We had for close-up shadows, we had our cascaded shadow maps that we were using, I think at a distance of like 1,600 units. And then we had distance-filled shadows that were shadowing the trees and other foliage out at the further distance, but we still needed the landscapes to have lighting at an even further distance. So what we have is, let me find my directional light here. Oh, let me get out of world settings and actually get back to here. Okay, so if you go down to our cascaded shadow maps area, what you have here is an option for far shadow cascade count. By default, it's always set to 0. The landscape is always enabled. So what I'm do is just type in far up here. So I've got far shadow is automatically enabled for landscapes. And then our light source. Now, and what you get here is you actually get cascaded shadows for these farther distances that are further than 300,000 units. So it can actually make a bigger difference for these larger open worlds where you actually may want a little bit of shadowing information to be out there as well. So, and then as you adjust the distance, can adjust it. And then same for cascades. The more cascades you give it, the more quality it gets at those distances. So
those are looking really sleek. You know, Andrew's got that, he's got another landscape tutorial that's going to be coming up in not too long, in a few weeks. And I know he's going to be doing some lighting stuff for that too. Just throwing that one out there.
So let's see here. I think I wanted to show some stuff here. Let me reference my notes.
Yeah, see, these landscapes are looking really cool.
Sorry, I got a lot of stuff I try and remember, and it's just...
Well, no, this is good. This is good. A lot of people are in chat or just asking general questions about, like, that I'm going to get to in a bit about just large world, small world, Arch-VIZ, those kind of things.
Okay.
So it sounds like you're probably going to answer a couple of large world questions right now.
Yeah, okay, so if we're going to talk large worlds real quick, light mapping for large worlds, I know we had the kite demo, and that thing was like 16 kilometers by 16 kilometers. So
and that's up on the where you can get a hold of it on the launcher.
That thing used fully dynamic lighting. You don't tend to see very large worlds actually using light mapping, especially not for foliage, just because it's so much. Your texture memory is going to be blown that way. So it's going to be astronomical for a lot of stuff. You may even run into like where the light building, depending on the size of the world, whenever you go to package, it'll save the map, should save the map, but it may be that your lighting data is taking up more than 2 gigs, and that will not package. I think that's like a Windows error for packaging I've seen a couple of times. So
good to be aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so...
Oh, getting some really nice questions out of chat, by the way.
Yeah, I think we're going to probably run out of time on this and may have to, because I've still got a few things to go through.
All right, you run through those.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to run through some of the settings here for our dynamic light. Here, I don't care about that one. Let me get just down to cascades here. Okay, so we have our dynamic light. The cascade shadow distance. It's always better to keep this as low as possible for what you need. I guess just depending on the project and what you're targeting. So, like I said, in Kite Demo, we kept it around 1,600 units. This one, I'll just set it like 10,000, just to show. And then, let's see here. The next setting we have is our number of cascades. So what you're doing here is you're actually adjusting the number of cascades that are happening out along the world. And think of these as like the quality levels along for your light. So it's like if I set that down to 0, I have none. If I set it to 1, I get, this single distance of 10,000 units is now casting just a single cascade out that is our quality level 1. Now, if I change that to 2, we now get a little bit better quality, and same. So depending on your distance and what you're trying to do, it's better to always keep this as low as possible within the realm of what you need, and then substituting, additional cascades or either alternative light sources like distance field shadowing, or even if you got like a stationary light and it's not like a giant world, just using like baked lighting for maybe just parts of the landscape instead. And then we have our distribution exponent, which is going to change how this is changed across the world. Now, it's like, understandably, it's like this may not make a lot of sense, but if we use an option here, and again, I had to write something down. Actually, I didn't write that one down. So if we go to advanced, I think it's shadow frustums. Here we go. So what we have is our directional light here, and then it's showing what we're casting out on the world. So as we start to adjust these settings for our distance, we can actually see how these are being shifted for our world as well. So as we add cascades or remove cascades, so we've got a single cascade that's now stretching this entire distance versus adding a second one. And if we adjust our distribution here, you can actually see how that's being affected as well. So that can give you a visual representation for some of the people that maybe are looking for that to kind of understand a little bit better. I actually have some examples up on my lighting troubleshooting that kind of show this, like with some GIFs and everything kind of running back and forth as well.
Can you also turn on the stat FPS and just so in general they can see exactly how much your demoing is costing you?
I have no idea what it's costing because I didn't look. So
there you go.
I can't even read that.
And they should be able to read it on there.
It's kind of hard to see very lightly lit things, like when I got a bright light in my face.
Yeah, so there's overhead lights, guys. Yeah. Just kind of blind us a little bit.
Okay, so this here. Okay, so one other thing, like with far shadows, you may think also, I don't need this just for my landscape. I'm just going to show this one real quick. So let's just say that we have like some distant object that's off in the distance, and we need to have shadowing for that in that cascade. You can actually select any actor. I don't recommend turning this on for everything, but just where you need it. So if you enable far shadow, you can enable them per actor as well to actually to get that. So it's like if I had like a distant building off here, it's like it would be easier just to enable far shadow, so that way it is getting that shadowing it needs. And then I think that's all I'm going to show with this one. All so right. Any questions for this part so far?
We have a lot of questions about general game development stuff, but there is what is the best approach for making self-shadowing landscapes? How do I program? That's...
yeah, I'm not a programmer. I make no secret about that one.
Yes, so Sedokun was asking,
I can read it, but I can't do anything.
Self-shadowing landscapes.
Landscapes automatically, like UE4, like when there's no lighting on it anyway, it automatically self-shadows, but, because like if I were to disable shadowing altogether, you still get shadowings on the landscape. So if I disable effect world here, well, I disabled the light altogether. I meant cast shadows is what I meant to do. Whoops. Me settings. Okay, so So it's like I don't have any, like this is all self-shadowing anyway for parts of it. But it's not self-shadowing like far shadows, like where it's actually casting this long shadow. So it's like, I mean, the mesh itself is actually shadowing these parts that are not affected by the light, but it's not going to cast a shadow from this peak all the way down here without far shadows or something else.
All right.
So I think it's, I don't know if I answered that.
I mean,
like,
I think this
fully.
is helpful there. Another question that's related to this map in general. It's Judd is asking, when making a day-night cycle and you have a directional light moving about, should the light actually be turned off when it's under the world? So I guess when you hit to that complete darkness, just go ahead and turn it off?
Yes. I mean, yeah, it's better to go ahead and just fade that out. I think even on my website and my forums, like I have this forums thread like where I used to put a lot of projects and just tips and things I ran across before I started doing the wiki and my website. But I have one on there like where as I was learning it a couple of years ago, it's like that was one thing I just set up someone's wiki and just kind of started tweaking it and actually just doing that transition of, you know, as it hits the world's horizon, it's actually disabling or it's actually fading out over time. Because I mean it's below the world that you have here. You don't want to see that, and
you wouldn't want any kind of strange rendering artifacts coming up at you.
And I don't know if that example is like a good example. It's like just because I didn't do any performance stuff profiling with it. I didn't try and make it the most optimized thing. I just was learning when I was messing with it. So it was just trying to see what I could do and extend from a wiki that was out there already. So. All right, so
those are the questions we have for that one.
Okay, cool. All right, so this next one, this is one that someone actually asked me at GDC last year, and I just did it as a fun little thing. It's nothing like amazing. It's just little simple art or whatever, but it's really just I want to show the power of like the post process here, because someone had asked me, it's like. They said they were doing a VR project and they wanted to dynamically have an emissive object light up their world. And I was just like, okay, well, let me just spend 15 minutes here and let me see what I can do. So what I just did is like I had an emissive material. It's like, and this is just using a simple post process that just kind of shifts over time. That's actually just attached to my mesh there. And it's blending between two post processes and adjusting the GI. So if we look here at the post process settings, you have this awesome option for global illumination here. Now this is a very small scene, and I needed just enough baked light information to actually be able to affect my my GI through the post process. So what I've got is I've got a little point light here that's a very low intensity, just enough so that I can. I don't know if it's a little harder to see just because it's shit stream, but it's but it's just enough just to get some baked information here for this room, and then as my piece moves here, it moves down into. Here, let me just. Whoops. Control Z. So as I play, all it's doing is I have a post process that's not adjusting any baked lighting information, and then this one is actually just taking and blending between them. So what I have is my global post process here is just using an indirect lighting intensity of 1, which is the default. There's nothing special about it. If I actually adjust this up and down, you can actually see how that the post process actually affects RGI. And then with the one that I have up here, I've actually taken the indirect lighting color. That's pretty much the same value as my light or my emissive material here. So as it moves down, it's lighting it up. I think post process usually gets overlooked for a lot of lighting things sometimes, and it's a very powerful thing to kind of be able to go back and tweak this without having to always go back and rebuild lighting or find these dynamic ways of doing things,
Can you lower our thing off of the thing you showing here? Yep. Sorry, our image is over.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. Here, we wanted a full screen so everybody can see.
Okay, I scrolled it up. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so these are the settings I was adjusting. So in post-process, you have global illumination, you have the indirect lighting color, and then you have the intensity. So because like if I move up in my post process here, you can actually see it's actually affecting this down here, because I'm now within that post process and it's overriding my global one. So if I adjust the intensity or lower the intensity, I just think it's always worth mentioning that, you know, there are a lot of ways to fake things, and don't always attempt to try and do lighting as like I have to do it real world all the time. So, okay.
Cool. We have quite a few questions about this one too.
Oh, okay, cool.
Let's see here. Can you elaborate a little bit more about how indirect lighting is interacting with normal maps?
I know indirect lighting automatically interacts with normal maps. There is a setting that's kind of like tricky in the project settings. I don't have an example for this. Let's see here. And it's like, I know this one's probably throwing people. I can give you a brief overview of it. Let's see here. Use normal maps for static lighting. Now, you may, if you ever seen this and you think that it's like, oh, you know, that means that lighting isn't affecting my normal maps, and it's like, no, that's not actually the case. What this is it's a special use case thing. So the example I was given a while back was, if we think about it this way, like we have a cube that has all normals that have been smoothed together. So it's all in the same smoothing group, and you get that, and we apply a normal map to it that has sharp edges. Lightmask doesn't know how to work with that. So what you need to do is enable this option, so that it tells Lightmask how to work with these types of normal maps to actually look and know where those hard edges are, even though it's a smoothed object. Again, I don't have an example for this, and I think I only ever did it once. So it's like I don't have a ton of information on it, but it's definitely something I could always do in the future.
Cool. And let's see here. Any tips for post-processing in nature environments, scene color, color int, to try to get better out of natural-looking environments, I guess, being more outdoors?
I'm not a lighting artist, so a lot of those things kind of, I think, fall under the lighting artist category. And it's one of those things, like, I just kind of go through and I'll tweak values until I get something that I like personally, or if I have a reference image I'm trying to match. I don't think I have, like, a dedicated definitive answer.
You know, that might actually be the correct answer, because now I'm thinking about it, is get a good image and then tweak values until you find something that looks like that. I mean,
that's typically what I do, like with
that's kind of what I do,
like when
too.
I do my own lighting practice and just trying to do some setups, you know, like if we ever get like learning time and whatnot, I'll just what I do is I have a reference image and I'll just kind of work through something. It's like, here's my goal of what I want to do, and see how close I can get to it.
Yeah, and I'm sure that, like I said about these kind of areas that you're talking about, like big open landscapes and stuff, I'm sure that we can convince Andrew to go over them a little bit.
I see we're running a little long on time.
Oh yeah. We'll get to it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
And right, if we don't get to your questions here, I do have a big list in chat, and we'll put them on the forums. If you're watching the YouTube archive later, that's in the description. I put a link to the forums with all the questions and answers.
Yeah.
Also.
I mean, I've got like pages here, like where I've actually got examples and things I want to show you guys. But if I don't get to it, I'll definitely answer you guys on the forums.
I'll just have to have you on more, I guess.
We do this one. Where's my backlighting one? Backlighting. Okay, so I've seen this one come up a lot, especially with Arch-VIZ people, and because there's an option for, I'm gonna just move to game view here. And actually, I'm gonna go back in r.cache. Let me get rid of some of my, if I spell things right.
C-A-C-H-E?
Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
All right, so backlighting tends to come up quite often, and people will go, why don't you just use emissive for static, and that'll just solve everything. And what I wanted to show here is the benefit of emissive for static, but also something that is something to be, well, not worried about, but something to work around. So what I have here is I have two examples. I have on the right here is my emissive for static, and then on my left here is actually just using point lights behind the geometry to try and get the same effect. Now this is a light map resolution of 128, and you'll notice that you don't get enough textile density to actually capture this. So the thing with emissive for static lighting is you need a good light map resolution. Something to be aware of as well is you only get a single bounce of direct light, so you don't get as good a quality as you would with point lights. And I have like a ton of point lights here behind all of these that have just kind of been spaced out as I threw it together, so just so I can try and, you know, get this nice same effect. I'm sure an artist could do something much better than me. So, but as we keep going and moving back, what you'll see here is I got 256. You start to get you get some better shadowing.
Yeah, you can tell on the right one, especially the amount of detail and how much lighting you're getting is definitely improved.
Yeah, it's improved. But I've now increased my texture memory for my light map there. So it's like, whereas over here, it's like, if we look at what's on the left, I'm not, as the texture, light map texture resolution increases, it's like I'm not getting enough gains that matter that most, but on the emissive for static, I do. So, and then same for 1024 here. It's like, you know, it's like you get a really nice effect, but, you know, is the cost of that texture, light map texture resolution worth it for what you need? And it's just like, it's another thing about going back to optimization and just finding what works for you and your games. Okay, so, all right, done with that one, unless there's questions.
Oh, there's plenty of questions, but I want to make sure you can work through as much of your material as you can.
Okay.
Because actually, I think you're going to end up answering quite a few of these.
Okay, cool. And I think the last one that I've got here that doesn't involve like straight running into questions is light map error coloring. This one's one of my favorites. So, and it's a feature that I don't think anyone really knows about. Okay, so if you go up here to your build for lighting, and then you're looking at the drop down, you'll have use error coloring. And what this allows is it can allow you for your scenes, if you build on a quality level of preview or medium. So if we go to our lighting quality and we're using medium or preview, ignore the production because that was for another level I built here beforehand. But so actually what I'll do real quick, because this one builds quick. If I build a level for production, what you're going to see is it's going to come out and it's going to not have any of this error coloring here. So everything looks fine, but what I get is I get these error warnings. Object has overlapping UVs, and it tells you the percentage, and another one has wrapping UVs. So these are two examples I've set up. So if we go back and we actually set the quality back down to, let's just say medium, and build, what we're going to do is we're going to get these error colors. And it's going to tell us still that we have these wrapping UVs and these overlapping UVs and the percentage. And now what I've got here is I've got my one that's got overlapping UVs. So it can be an easy way to kind of find these lighting errors in your world and determine if it's something that you need to go back and fix real quick. Okay, so let's do this. We're just going to move straight into like these little tips and tricks that I've got. These are fairly quickly, unless there's questions on this specific one.
On this one in particular, no, Lewis says that it would probably be good for a lot of people to watch this chunk, though. So
yeah, all the tips and tricks.
Yeah, this one you just did
yeah, because like the tips and tricks stuff that I want to show is just a lot of like how to find some of these things. So, all right, so here's the notorious. You've got objects that need to be rebuilt now. So you may always, and you know, it doesn't give a name here for what these are, you know, that you're trying to find. So what we're going to do is we're going to find those actors. So go to right menu and then go down here to, nope, go back to this one, developer, and then output log. And where did my output log go? Nope, there we go. Took it a second. Okay, so what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the command dump all unbuilt light interactions. I think I typed that right. No.
What are you looking for?
Yeah, I cannot see this. Dump unbuilt. There we go. So if I dump the unbuilt lighting interactions, what you get now is a list of the actors that have not had their lighting built. So what we get is we get the point lights that are affecting them, and then we get the primitives. So in this little section here, I've got anything that's within the light radius. So my actor over here is within light radius. So this one, even though these two are in separate rooms, but what it's doing is it's telling me the lights that are affected, and then I've got the primitive static mesh component that is affected as well, which you can see here is SM overlapping UVs, which is the name of my mesh. So that can be a quick way to try and find some of these interactions. All right. And then another little gem here is if we go here to statistics, and what we have here is we have two that we want to look at. We want to look at the lighting build info, and we want to look at the static mesh lighting info. So if we look at lighting build info, what this does is this actually tells me the information about the lighting build, how long the lighting build actually took once it was exported to Lightmass and Swarm Agent and took care of it, how long each mesh took. Now, why is this important is because like if we're looking, there's a lot of times when people say that it's like, oh, my lighting is stuck at 0%, or it's like, I don't know why lighting is, is taking this long to build. Here, like once it actually completes, you can actually go in here and see what actors are actually taking the longest. And it may be that, you've got a really large light map for it that's just taking a long time to calculate, or it's affected by so many different lights that it takes longer to calculate. And you can actually see the texture, the total textile memory that it's going to be using as well. So if we go over here to lighting, static mesh lighting info, you can actually see the name of the mesh, the level that it's in, the texture type, the UVs, the resolution of the light map that is being used, the texture light map, and how much is being used, your total here. If I select any of these, it actually opens in the content browser or selects it in the content browser and selects it in the world. So that can be a really useful thing as well to kind of go through, and you can actually export all this for your level as well as a CSV. So, okay, so moving right along. Let's see here, I'm gonna go, let me just do a new world here real quick. New level, don't care to save that. So a new feature was added, I think, in 4.13. So I'm gonna crank this up, change this to a bright color so I can see it. Max distance. So if we have a distance for our lights, you can actually set a distance that you want this to actually, the maximum amount of distance that it wants to be drawn in to. So I'm gonna set this one to actually like 2000 and then back out. So if I do, let me slow down my, whoops.
Whoa.
There we go. Okay, so as I back out, once I get to a distance of 2,000 units or more, it actually stops rendering that light.
This is actually answering a couple of Q&A questions about.
And this one's actually really cool too. So it's like you have the fade distance for the range. So it's like if I set that to actually 1,000, you can actually, instead of just having it pop in and out, you can actually have it fade. So just another little quick tip. Let's see here. Whoops. Let me go back to my maps, and I got one last map, just because everyone always asks about volumetric lighting.
Oh goodness.
So.
Volumetric lighting, you say?
Yeah, not a dynamic thing, but. So in the engine content folder, so let me just hit my game view here. So this is the banner image I actually used, and just using some simple volumetric lighting. All it is just a material on a static mesh. And if you're ever wanting just some simple examples, we actually have those in our engine content folder. So if you go to View Options, Show Engine Content, and you go over to here, and you type in light beam, you get these awesome materials that have already been set up, and you get some static meshes that you can drag into your world. Not that one. Let me grab this one instead. So you can use these and just have these placed under your light. This is a lot of way volumetric lighting is kind of faked in most games. So if I
hit T, so you can hit translucent things.
There we go. So that's my static mesh that I've scaled up, and I've just got my material on it. And if we open up the material, it's just I use the default material that was already there. I just changed some of the settings on the instance, so that way I could actually get a softer volumetric lighting than what was already the default. And then, any other questions so far?
Oh yeah,
okay, cool.
Quite a few. So let's see here. You had actually answered a couple things, but when you were doing the lighting thing, what settings control the distance in which shadows silhouettes pop in and out?
Hold on, what was the question?
About, I guess, LODs for shadows, what causes them to pop in and out. You had covered, the lighting popping in and out, and that would kind of cover that as well.
So for, that all comes down to like a scalability thing in the max resolutions. So in engine scalability, if anyone's ever used it, is for shadows here we have like low, medium, high. The base scalability.ini file actually lists a lot of the console variables that are being set for this. So if you're using like point lights, spotlights, you start to lose, like those are automatically going to go to a lower resolution at further distances just because of optimization. So if we used, like I think the engine scalability here for like Epic is using r.shadows.max resolutions of 2048, whereas we have this new cinematic feature option that actually increases that value, and it's only increasing the max shadow resolution. I think it increases like to 4096, which is maybe the max. I've never seen it above that. And you can get a higher shadow map resolution for these point lights and whatnot. For dynamic light or for directional lights, the cascades are definitely there to help with that, and just how you distribute them along the cascades.
Now, Sedokun is asking, are those volumetric lighting fakes costly due to overdraws?
Depends on how much you got. This scene, nope.
This scene where you have two, no. But I guess
I mean, overdraw is always like a big issue, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you always want to like. I don't want to say it's like, go out and use these all in your world or anything. And it's like I don't want to give the impression that it's like I just throw this stuff together and I never profile. It's like you always want to profile your games, especially if you're going to be releasing something, especially if you're targeting a specific console or platform in general. It's always a good idea to profile and see where things are getting used. But I think that's a whole nother stream than this one. So.
Yeah, probably not covered here, but so. I'd like to know, I guess if you could crack open one of those, just I guess that cone or something, and just take a quick look through through its setup, kind of start to finish, how you've created such a thing.
I created nothing. This is all in engine content.
Okay.
I just repurposed.
Okay, so show how you have repurposed.
Yes. Okay, so what we have here is just static mesh itself. Let me actually go to a wireframe, maybe. Or actually, you know what? Let me just get rid of... World. Yeah, world grid material, why not? Why no update? Okay, well, here, you know what, I'll just go to wireframe. Okay, so this is just, and there's several different static meshes that have like different shapes and whatnot. For the purposes of just throwing my little banner together, I just grabbed this one and just rescaled it to kind of somewhat fit my needs. For any lights that you are going to need, it's always just like, I would set up the mesh in a way that fits your needs. And it's like, this isn't a very complex UV layout. It's just been flattened. And it's actually just laid out here, so that way, the way the material applies, it's like you're not seeing really any seams, and by the time you get closer, it's fading out. So it's like if you have a bad UV layout, the material's not really going to save you on that one. I don't know that I really have any specific tips necessarily, other than just kind of like this, we have this content that's here to look at. There's also the Blueprint Office demo and the Sun Temple have God rays in them as well, and all those are is it's using a single plane with a similar type material that's a little bit more. It's got some fluctuating rays and everything in it that follow the direction of the sun. So those are some really good examples I would suggest looking at if you're definitely going to approach this from the art side. But for the purposes of this.
Awesome. That actually kind of answered another question about how would you go about doing God rays, and so there you go. We have an office with them, and we have a Sun Temple that has them all built
the
in.
Blueprint Office example.
And they are essentially this.
Yep. The Blueprint Office example I think was the one that's a little bit more in depth setup, and it's got some. It actually has like a whole blueprint, so that way you could actually just migrate that to your project if you wanted to see how it goes, and then all you have to do is just assign the directional light for it. Okay. So
cool. So you got another?
I've got a bunch of questions if we got the time. If we wanted to shoot through, or
why don't you want to
wrap it up?
Yeah, because we have about 10 minutes before we have to be at a meeting.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Why don't you knock out the forum questions? Everyone from chat, really great stuff. Actually, there's one from chat I'd like to get to.
Okay.
Let's see here. Let's see. Copernicus was asking how to use light map resolution adjustment settings to do change over all assets you built lighting on in the level.
Okay, so
instead of manually adjusting lighting resolutions for every asset.
I won't mislead or lie on this one. I've hardly used this at all.
but
I can show you where it's at. Lighting info here, and then you get light map density rendering options, and then you have light map resolution adjustment, and then the lighting static info. If you want to get back to that real quick. Without having to go through the menu, that'll pop that up as well. Forgot about that. So many lighting things. So I mean, here it's like I think the idea of it is you can set your ideal density for what you want. Maximum density, color scale. It's like honestly, I can point you to where it is, and then I would say just play around with it until you get it. I haven't used it enough to where I can just actually guide you on it. So,
cool.
But there's one other thing too. To see that density, we have the optimization view here for light map density, and so I know everything looks blue. You can't really see the grid, but what I'm going to do is override light map resolution if I select the right thing. Okay, so if I set this to like 64. I think that actually, did that go down? It's actually not adjusting. Well, regardless, the light map density view, when you build lighting, you should be able to see that this actually adjusts the
whole scene.
Yeah, it'll adjust the whole scene, and you'll actually get if you got a question, I can do that while I go to something else real quick.
All right,
and then I'll come right back to that light map density thing.
All right. So yeah, we have quite a few of these. Any hint about making light in space, like light from a star?
Post-process?
Post-process? Yeah, actually that probably...
yeah, using post-process.
I actually now think about you can do post-process and then have it be controlled by distance, like how close you get to it. That's actually a checkbox.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, that would be adjusting bloom and just some of your settings there, I think. Because, I mean, you're using, at that point, it's like, a lot of people are all about, real-world scales and whatnot, and I don't think that's always the best option necessarily, just depending on the game, especially for something like where you're trying to get like these super really large worlds. You start to lose this detail, especially from dynamic lighting at further distances, because without typing in a value like a directional dynamic light, you can the max slider value is like only 20,000 units. So let's see here. Let me actually get back to. Oh.
Cool. So what's this map? Oh, I see. It's the other one, but we're looking at it with, haha, I was tricked.
Yes.
What's the setting you got on here? Light density?
Yeah, for some reason, I don't know if I broke something or whatnot, because like it worked earlier, because like that one on the end should actually be bright red because the density is so cranked up on it. I'm not sure why that is. I'll have to actually investigate that part. But okay, so
what's the question off form then?
Let's see here. I'll just start at the top. Casting cinematic shadows. Someone had asked about that one. There's actually 2 ways of doing that. And let me go back to my CSM settings one here. So there's 2 things really. There's like dynamic inset shadows, and someone asked about that one as well. I think it was William K. Now, dynamic inset shadows allows anything outside of the dynamic shadow distance for our light to actually still cast shadows for a movable actor. It's like, you know, so it's like if I set this down to 0, I have no dynamic lighting being cast from my distance here, but I've still got shadows on my character. So, but as I adjust my scale up here, it's like you can see those shadows actually pop back in. So that, I don't know if that maybe just is a quick example to show him. Cinematic shadows. So what this one allows is, let's just say that I have a point light here, and I enable on it. It actually has to be set to movable. And then cinematic shadows, there we go. What it allows is any actor that actually has this flag checked as well will cast shadows from that light without having to worry about the, I think it's like the scene depth for it affecting any other areas, not lighting channels, but something that can actually help for just, I'd say just use it for cinematics, as the name
as the name implies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so another one always comes up, Arch-VIZ, outdoor lighting stuff. I think a good post-process volume here and just adjusting some settings. Again, not a lighting artist. So it's just a matter of, you know, finding a good reference and finding something that works for you. There's a UE4 game that I really love the lighting in. It's called The Park. I don't know if anyone's...
The Park, yeah, by Funcom. Yeah, that was made as a, I think it was like a game jam, internally, game jam game at Funcom.
So it's like, it's got like this whole like secret world-esque kind of feel to the story and everything. But the lighting in that is so amazing. It's just like, it's a very beautifully rendered game. And they use a lot of post-process effects. And it's like my go-to example for eye adaptation at night and nighttime scenes is that game. There's some really cool stuff there. I think it would be a good just kind of study
example
for people.
Yeah.
Okay, so for outdoor lighting as well, especially for Arch-VIZ, that's like, I know Arch-VIZ people tend to have like these smaller scenes, and it's like you have like your foliage and everything else, but it tends not to be like these large outdoor worlds, kind of like back here, like with this giant landscape. You know, I don't recommend avoiding light maps in that case. I think just managing how you use your light maps and static lighting is like the best approach there, and using the lighting statistics tool window and seeing what's causing you the longest on your light builds and where you can actually improve things. Definitely making sure to use light mass importance volumes, you know, to kind of focus those. We also have the indirect light mass portals that you can use in Windows to actually focus the photons to actually get better indirect lighting in there. I didn't actually show an example of that one, but there's some really good stuff from Daniel on the forums with that one.
Yeah, he tends to have some pretty great stuff. Anything by Daniel Wright is generally amazing.
The other thing too is like, and this is just general for everyone. So in the foliage tool, if we just add, let me just find a static mesh here so we can see some settings. And I'll just take this, drag it up here. There's an option in here for light map resolution. It's disabled by default. Where is it?
What are some other great games with great lighting in your opinion? Kvasibarn asks. I'm sorry if I got your name wrong.
I'll be honest, man. I don't get to play too many games.
Yeah, actually, it seems to be kind of the ongoing struggle of game developers.
I mean, I got a kid at home now, so it's like my free time to play games is so limited.
You know, I'm going to be picking up Resident Evil 7, and I'll tell you all what I think about the lighting in that, because that looked really good from the previews, lighting-wise.
Okay, I know I keep skipping. Okay, here we go. It's all shaded out. Okay, so cast static shadow. If you don't need them, disable them. You know, it's like if your foliage is moving and having static shadows on the ground and the tree's waving or the grass is waving, you know, it's like disable it. Typically for grass anyway, I would probably just disable it because, like, I mean, that's a lot of meshes and things to have to calculate. But this other option here is light map resolution. By default, it's disabled. So that means that whatever cluster that you have for your foliage is getting all wound up into using your default light map resolution for that mesh. So if you come here for that cluster and you can actually set these to a lower value, I would say 8's the default. Depending on the size of your world and what you're trying to do, maybe worthwhile just to lower it even more, down to 4. So, but again, it just kind of depends on the size of your world and what's going on. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on here I didn't get time to get to. It's just like I know we're kind of running long.
We're running out of time now, unfortunately. But like I said, we have a few more questions that are on here, a few questions out of here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the questions out of the chat here, and the ones that were left over on the forums, we can answer them there, and we can also probably do a follow-up stream, which is what.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with lighting is there's no way to kind of cram it all into 1 hour or hour and a half.
Yeah.
There's just so many different things, and the examples that you guys had asked to see over the last week or so, it's like I think there's hopefully this has been helpful for a lot of you.
I think that we've gotten quite a few bits of information across, and the thing that I think I've gathered from what you all have been asking out there is what you'd like to see is probably a stream where we go over what genres of lighting might look like, what different genres of games lighting might default to that we've seen before in a few different kinds of things. Survival horrors come up, horror games, large open world, small Arch-VIZ things. So we'll try to craft another stream around those suggestions and try to get to your answers as much as we can on the forums. And but unfortunately, we are out of time and have to get moving to something
literally
else.
Run to a meeting.
Yeah, literally run to a meeting. But thank you all for coming out, and I will see you all again hopefully on Thursday at 2 p.m. EST. We're going to have Nick Darnell on here with me to talk about the 4.15 preview, and that's going to be really fun. He's got a little slideshow to show everybody as well. And then next Tuesday we'll have yet another training stream. Remember, we have Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. EST streams every single week. And those are my pitches for that. And then this Thursday we have the local Raleigh UE4 meetup. So if you're out here, please come and say hi to me. I will be out there hosting it. So that's what we have for today. Tim, thank you so much for coming out and talking to us about all this great lighting techniques.
Definitely.
And we will have to have you on again in the future.
Yeah,
but,
we'll see.
Break my heart, why don't you? Wow,
definitely always glad to come back. So.
We'll see. Well, everyone, we'll see. See you next time.
See you guys.